You know, I'm amazed that the left so hates, detests, loathes US President Donald Trump that they would use even funerals now to abuse him. It's extraordinary. Donald Trump was attacked by speakers at the funeral last week of Republican Senator John McCain, but that was restrained compared to the orgy of hatred at the funeral of singer Aretha Franklin. There was this, for instance, from a sociology professor.
And then this orange apparition had the nerve to say she worked for him. You lugubrious leech. You dopey doppelganger of deceit and deviance. You lethal liar. You dim-witted dictator. You foolish fascist.
Wow. And then race baiter Al Sharpton lashed out too, to remind you, at a funeral.
Trump said she used to work for me. No, she used to perform for you. She worked for us.
Such hatred now from the left. And I'm afraid you're going to see a lot more of it. And some this week, as Nigel Farage tours Australia giving speeches. It's not Nigel Farage who's the problem. Farage, by the way, is the former UKIP leader in Britain and European Parliament MP who fought for decades to get Britain out of the European Union and triumphed when the British voted yes to Brexit. Farage's victory, of course, inspired Donald Trump, who got Farage to campaign for him. Now, Nigel Farage is actually an important voice in some big debates that occur right here as well. But protesters at his first speech in Perth screamed abuse at people merely going to hear him put his arguments. And I'm afraid that violence is likely at his event in Melbourne, where we've already seen, of course, leftist mobs attack the audience going to a Milo Yiannopoulos speech. They've attacked people at a speech by Canadian filmmaker Lauren Southern as well. Nigel Farage joined me from Adelaide a short while ago. Nigel Farage, thank you so much for joining me. The abuse of Donald Trump at those funerals of John McCain and Aretha Franklin, what does that tell you?
What it tells me is that the left completely hate what happened back in 2016. It started with Brexit. It extended to Donald Trump. We now, of course, have a new government in Italy, and they are determined at all costs to derail the global revolution that began back then. But I think the reason they're behaving as badly as they are is because they're losing. They are losing. And the feeling of ordinary people that they want to live in democratic nation-states, control their borders, protect their cultures and communities, that argument is winning every single time.
Yeah, but I'm a bit puzzled, though, because, I mean, you know, the Conservatives might have thought they were losing under the 8 years of Barack Obama, but I don't recall celebrity funerals being used to preach hatred like this. This is quite extraordinary. And the level of protest from the left now against speakers like you or whatever, they're getting so physically violent that I think there's something in the water now that wasn't there before.
Yeah, it's quite scary. And, of course, much of it is being bred and fostered through our universities. We've stopped teaching people critical thinking. We've stopped teaching young people, here's a problem, here are two solutions, make your own mind up. We're teaching them this solution is virtuous and good, and the other one makes you a Nazi. Our education system, I promise you, has got a lot to do with this, and it's worrying because, you know, we are forgetting what democracy itself is all about.
But we've seen the increase in violence. We've seen people attacking these left wingers, the Antifa movement and others, attacking people trying to hear Geert Wilders speak in Melbourne, for example. Melbourne's the worst, by the way, so watch out when you come here. They attack Geert Wilders' followers. They attack people trying to hear Milo Yiannopoulos. They attack people trying to hear Lauren Southern. I've been attacked in the street. It is really quite extraordinary. I don't know, is Australia unusual in that? What sort of risk of physical violence do you face in Britain, for example?
Oh, look, I've had to live I've had to live for nearly 5 years, particularly when I was absolutely at the front line of national elections and the Brexit campaign. I've had to live with security around me the whole time, and at times 24/7 security. I mean, they've even started attacking the houses of Conservative figures. And at some point in time, surely, you know, law enforcement has to say this is ridiculous. I did see a specimen last night of your Australian protesters outside the meeting in Perth Town Hall. And just to show you, Andrew, how rational and logical these people are, one of their big protest complaints was the way that Aboriginal rights had been dealt with, as if somehow I'm now guilty for what's happened to the Aborigines. Well, I've got clearly nothing to do with it. You know, it's rent-a-mob, it's anarchistic, it's anti-democratic, and you know, people have a right to protest, but people do not have a right to stop other people speaking in a free society.
Do you sometimes think, Nigel, that well, I think you're obviously a far more substantial figure than Milo Yiannopoulos, but with some of these figures at least, I'm feeling that what is done to them is now almost more important than what they actually say. Because it seems to be exposing this militancy, this intolerance, this recourse to violence, this unleashed hatred that I find is... people need to know that this is going on. I mean, do you feel in some ways you've become a canary in the coal mine by taking the stance you do, given what's being done to you?
Yeah, I mean, the difficulty often is, and again, it shows you how warped our minds have become. I mean, I'll give you an example. I went to Scotland 4 years ago. I was in the main street in Edinburgh, just down from the Parliament. I was attacked by a mob of about 100 student radical protesters, saying things that were openly hostile, racist, abusive about the English, threatening to me. I had a driver in the car, a Scottish driver. They told him, "You take Mr. Farage, we'll come to your house and find where you live." And the bloke was literally frozen with fear. And when the news reports came out, the general line of questioning I got from the liberal media in Edinburgh was, well, you've come to our country, you deserved it, didn't you? I mean, it's almost as if much of the liberal media is complicit in this kind of behaviour, so desperate are they to shout down patriotic nation-state views. Quite where this all ends, I don't know, but I'm guessing that it is those broadcasters that behave in this way that in the end will go out of business. I mean, look in America. CNN is wall-to-wall, 24/7 anti-Donald Trump propaganda, or, as he calls them, fake news. If you now look at the top 25 current affairs shows in America, CNN only has one in the top 25. So in the end, they're going to destroy their own businesses and destroy their own credibility. That's what I think.
Well, I think it's a really remarkable tribute to the kind of people now defying the protests, defying the threats of violence, to come to hear you. Most of your tour already is sold out, and you've only just begun. So tell us why you are here. What is the main theme you're pushing in your tour?
Well, the theme is that there was this great global revolution that began in 2016. I was a witness to it. In fact, I was the only person in the world involved directly in the Brexit campaign and indeed in the Trump campaign. I shared a stage with the president and supported him all the way through. I think I understand better than most what the causes of this revolution were. I believe in all my heart that far from it being a short-term outburst of anger, in fact, there is a whole movement now that's going to sweep the entire West. And I guess my message here in Australia is that if you keep your Liberal Party firmly in the centre of politics, you know, somewhere nearer to being Social Democrats than being real Conservatives, then don't be surprised if something remarkable happens here too.
As in, they'll be outflanked, I presume. But can you, when you say this movement, what are the moral or social concerns that are driving this movement? It's easy when you look at the protesters; they will say, with obvious sincerity and a lot of hate, that it's racism. How would you actually define it?
Well, the trouble is, so many of those who believe in the protest movement are effectively Trotskyites. They're effectively world revolutionaries. I mean, they would like us to live under one world government with one single currency where we're all global citizens and we can move about freely. It's kind of an updated version of what communism was 100 years ago. It is wholly unrealistic. It will never, ever work. What I think is really interesting, if you look at Europe right now, you see the new Italian government, you see the Alternative for Deutschland are now second in the opinion polls. There is a general election taking place in Sweden on the 9th of this month, at which the Swedish Democrats could even win the elections. So this big surge that is happening away from the centre, and it's happening at a time when economics is relatively benign. You know, Eurozone growth has been reasonable for the last 2 years. So this is about nation-state identity. This is about democracy. This is about actually directly being in control of the laws and decisions that influence your future. This is about the Judeo-Christian culture in which we all grew up and which underpins, frankly, almost everything in our society. It's about communities. It's about our quality of life. And people feel, with some justification, that actually if you move towards a period of open-door immigration, all of those things are under threat. Now, you know, I'm not against immigration. I'm for managed immigration. But somehow the protesters try and conflate any border controls with racism, which clearly is total and utter rubbish.
Now, you said earlier that if the Liberal Party stays in the Social Democrat centre, they'll get run over one day by the right. At the moment, the parties of the right that we've had have struggled to gain some traction, with the marginal exception of Pauline Hanson's One Nation. One of the things they're doing is trying to outbid each other on Muslim immigration, with Pauline Hanson's One Nation, Fraser Anning from Bob Katter's Australia Party saying, well, let's ban Muslim immigration. That doesn't seem to really sell in Australia. Why do you think that is?
Because people are reasonable. People are grown up about this. You know, wanting to have proper controls on immigration. You know, you can't go to war against an entire religion. What we need to be doing is going to war with Islamism. What we need to be doing is making sure that we vet people who come to our countries. But it does seem to me that some on the hard right, you know, want to turn this into a religious war. And my warning to anybody tempted by that is, if we go down that route, we will lose. What we need to do is to get the moderate Muslims living in our societies, and hey, you know, in the case of Britain, we're talking about very considerable numbers. We need to get them on our side. Outright hatred and hostility to an entire religion is not the way forward.
Nigel Farage, well said. Thank you so much indeed. And I think I'll be catching up with you later in your tour. Good luck.
Look forward to it. Thank you.